Few names in history echo with as much grandeur and fascination as Alexander the Great. Revered as one of the most remarkable military strategists and conquerors the world has ever known, Alexander III of Macedon carved a path across the ancient world that left an indelible mark on civilizations from Greece to India. Born in 356 BCE, he would go on to become king at the age of 20 and spend the next 13 years forging one of the largest empires in human history. Yet, his story is not just one of battle and conquest, it is also the tale of a visionary leader shaped by culture, philosophy, ambition, and tragedy. This essay will explore Alexander's life in depth, from his upbringing under King Philip II and the philosophical guidance of Aristotle, to his breathtaking campaigns across Asia and his enduring influence long after his untimely death. We will explore the psychological makeup of the man behind the legend, the cultural and political implications of his reign, and the ways in which his memory has been interpreted and mythologized over centuries. Before understanding Alexander, one must understand the world into which he was born. The Kingdom of Macedon, located to the north of classical Greece, was long considered a peripheral land by its more sophisticated southern neighbors. Yet under King Philip II, the Macedonian state underwent a remarkable transformation. Through a series of military reforms, diplomatic maneuvers, and sheer force of will, Philip reshaped Macedon into a powerful, centralized monarchy with one of the most formidable armies in the ancient world. Philip was a king of vision and pragmatism. He understood the fragmented nature of the Greek city-states and exploited their rivalries to secure dominance. By the time Alexander was born in 356 BCE in the city of Pella, Philip had already asserted Macedonian hegemony over much of Greece. His ambition, charisma, and ruthlessness laid the foundation upon which Alexander would build his empire. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was no less formidable. A princess of Epirus and a devout follower of the god Dionysus, she wielded considerable influence at court. She was known for her intense devotion and fierce ambition for her son. According to legend, she claimed that Alexander was the son of Zeus, conceived under mysterious and divine circumstances. This myth, whether believed or manipulated, would become a powerful psychological and political tool in Alexander's adult life. From an early age, Alexander demonstrated remarkable intelligence, confidence, and physical prowess. His father recognized these gifts and ensured that his education was entrusted to the best minds available. Most famously, when Alexander was 13, he was placed under the tutelage of Aristotle, the great philosopher of the Greek world. For 3 years, Aristotle instructed Alexander and a group of noble youths in literature, philosophy, science, politics, and ethics. Aristotle's teachings had a profound impact on Alexander. He was introduced to Homer's Iliad, which would become his lifelong companion and model for heroism. He developed a passion for learning, a respect for culture, and an understanding of governance that would influence his future empire building. Alexander reportedly kept a copy of the Iliad under his pillow during his campaigns, and he sought to emulate the bravery and nobility of Achilles. Yet Alexander was not content to be merely a student. His competitive spirit and growing sense of destiny pushed him to seek distinction even as a youth. According to Plutarch, when Alexander was just 10 years old, he tamed the wild horse Bucephalus, a feat none of Philip's men could accomplish. This act impressed his father so deeply that he reportedly declared, "My son, seek thee out a kingdom equal to thyself, Macedonia is too little for thee." Despite his accomplishments, Alexander grew up in the long and imposing shadow of his father. Philip II was a warrior king of immense stature, and he viewed Alexander both as an heir and, at times, a potential rival. Their relationship was often strained by court intrigues, Philip's multiple marriages, and competing factions within the Macedonian elite. In 336 BCE, a pivotal and shocking event occurred. Philip was assassinated at the wedding of his daughter. The murder remains shrouded in mystery, but Olympias and Alexander were among those suspected of involvement, though no evidence ever conclusively proved their guilt. What is clear is that Alexander acted swiftly and decisively in the wake of his father's death. At the age of 20, Alexander was proclaimed king. Almost immediately, he faced revolts and threats to his authority. The Greek city-states saw an opportunity to break free from Macedonian dominance. But Alexander responded with astonishing energy and military brilliance. Within months, he reasserted control over Greece, destroyed the rebellious city of Thebes as a warning to others, and secured the loyalty of the Corinthian League, which recognized him as the leader of a pan-Hellenic campaign against Persia. With his kingdom stabilized, Alexander turned his gaze eastward, to the mighty Persian Empire. The ambition to invade Persia had been Philip's dream, and Alexander now adopted it with fervor. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor with an army of about 40,000 men. The campaign would become one of the most celebrated military endeavors in history. The first major battle took place at the river Granicus, where Alexander personally led a cavalry charge that broke the Persian lines. Victory after victory followed, but none were more decisive than the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Here, Alexander faced the Persian king Darius III, who commanded a vastly superior force. Through brilliant maneuvering and unmatched courage, Alexander routed the Persian army. Darius fled, leaving behind his family, who were treated with great respect by Alexander. Alexander's genius lay not only in tactics but also in diplomacy and psychological warfare. By portraying himself as a liberator rather than a conqueror, he won over many of the cities and peoples of the Persian Empire. He adopted elements of Persian dress and ceremony, a decision that would earn both admiration and criticism from his own troops. After defeating Darius III at Issus, Alexander turned his attention to consolidating his hold over the eastern Mediterranean. One of the most formidable obstacles to this goal was the Phoenician city of Tyre, a heavily fortified island stronghold off the coast of present-day Lebanon. Tyre had withstood countless previous sieges due to its natural and man-made defenses. It was a jewel of naval trade, a city whose allegiance Alexander could not afford to leave undecided. When Tyre refused to surrender, Alexander embarked on one of the most extraordinary military sieges in history. Lacking a navy powerful enough to attack the city directly, he resolved to build a causeway from the mainland to the island, a colossal engineering feat undertaken under constant attack from Tyrian defenders. The siege lasted 7 months. Alexander constructed siege towers, repelled naval attacks, and even brought in fleets from conquered Phoenician cities to complete his naval blockade. Eventually, Tyre's walls were breached in 332 BCE, and the city fell. In a rare display of brutality, Alexander allowed his soldiers to exact vengeance for their long struggle. Thousands of Tyrians were killed or sold into slavery. It was a warning to other cities: defiance would be crushed with overwhelming force. Following the fall of Tyre and the subsequent conquest of Gaza, Alexander marched into Egypt, then a satrapy of the Persian Empire. There, he encountered no resistance. The Egyptians, long resentful of Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a liberator and a semi-divine being. This reception played directly into the Macedonian king's growing belief in his divine destiny. In 331 BCE, Alexander founded Alexandria, the first and most enduring of the many cities he would establish bearing his name. Strategically located on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria would become a beacon of learning, culture, and commerce for centuries. Its famed lighthouse, great library, and cosmopolitan nature reflected Alexander's vision of a blended Hellenistic world. But perhaps the most symbolic moment of his time in Egypt came when Alexander journeyed across the desert to the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa Oasis. The oracle was thought to communicate with the gods, and Alexander's visit was cloaked in secrecy. What the oracle told him remains unknown, but afterward, Alexander increasingly referred to himself as the son of Zeus Ammon, merging Greek and Egyptian religious identities. To his followers, this marked the turning point from mere king to divinely favored ruler, and perhaps even a god. With Egypt under his control, Alexander prepared for the ultimate confrontation with Darius III. The Persian king had regrouped his forces and amassed a massive army near Gaugamela, in modern-day Iraq. The stage was set for one of the most decisive battles in world history. The Battle of Gaugamela, fought in October 331 BCE, showcased Alexander's strategic brilliance. Facing an enemy that outnumbered his own troops by at least 2 to 1, some estimates say 5 to 1, Alexander meticulously studied the battlefield and anticipated Darius's every move. Despite Darius's use of war chariots, elephants, and an expansive infantry, Alexander outflanked the Persian lines and personally led the companion cavalry in a lightning-fast charge that broke through the center. Once again, Darius fled, abandoning his troops and royal family. This time, the defeat marked the true collapse of the Persian Empire. Alexander declared himself king of Asia and took control of the royal treasury at Susa. Babylon, Persepolis, and Ecbatana soon followed, and with them, the crown jewels of a broken dynasty. At Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire, Alexander allowed his troops to loot the city. Later, in a controversial decision, possibly fueled by alcohol and symbolic revenge, he allowed or ordered the burning of the royal palace of Xerxes. Some accounts claim he regretted the act deeply, while others suggest it was a calculated message: the old world had ended, and a new one was rising in its place. Though his empire had effectively been won, Alexander was not content. Darius had escaped once more, and Alexander pursued him relentlessly across the Iranian plateau. The chase became a symbolic quest, not just to finish his conquest, but to eliminate the last figurehead of Persian authority. Eventually, in 330 BCE, Darius was captured and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus, who declared himself the new king. When Alexander reached the site of Darius's death, he was reportedly overcome with sorrow. He covered Darius's body with his cloak and arranged a royal funeral in accordance with Persian customs. In doing so, Alexander sent a clear message: he was not just a conqueror, but the rightful heir to Darius's empire. Bessus, now an outlaw and traitor, became the next target. Alexander launched a grueling campaign through Central Asia, capturing Bessus and ordering his execution. During this time, he encountered fierce resistance from local tribes, including the Sogdians and the infamous fortress at the Sogdian Rock, which Alexander took in a daring night assault. It was in these eastern provinces that Alexander's vision of a unified, multicultural empire began to take shape. He adopted more Persian customs, wore traditional garments, and began to marry into local nobility to cement alliances. Most famously, he married Roxana, the daughter of a Sogdian noble. Their union was both political and romantic, and Roxana would later bear Alexander's only known son. However, these attempts at cultural integration were not always welcomed by his Macedonian companions. Many were disturbed by what they saw as Alexander's increasing Persianization, especially his adoption of proskynesis, a Persian act of bowing before the king. For Greeks and Macedonians, this bordered on blasphemy, as they believed such reverence should be reserved for the gods. Despite grumblings within the ranks, Alexander pressed onward. He envisioned not merely ruling Persia, but fusing East and West into a single, harmonious civilization, a radical idea centuries ahead of its time. But as his ambitions grew loftier, the burdens of leadership, and the shadows of paranoia, began to take a toll. Tensions within Alexander's inner circle came to a head in 328 BCE during a drunken banquet in Central Asia. A fierce argument broke out between Alexander and Clitus the Black, a veteran officer who had saved Alexander's life at Granicus. Clitus openly criticized Alexander's adoption of Persian customs and his treatment of Macedonian nobles. In a fit of drunken rage, Alexander killed Clitus with a spear, an act he immediately regretted. He reportedly shut himself away for days, mourning the man who had once been like an uncle to him. The incident marked a profound turning point. It revealed a growing instability in Alexander's character, driven by isolation, stress, and the godlike aura he had begun to cultivate. In the years that followed, Alexander continued to purge his court of those he viewed as disloyal. Executions, betrayals, and suicides haunted the final years of his campaign. Though his vision of empire remained intact, his personal relationships began to fray, and the man who had once inspired loyalty through charisma now ruled more often through fear. With Central Asia pacified and his empire now stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush, Alexander turned his gaze farther east. His ambition, by now bordering on obsession, was to reach the very ends of the known world, to march beyond the frontiers and into the lands only spoken of by traders and mystics. The next destination, India. In 327 BCE, Alexander led his forces through the treacherous mountain passes of the Hindu Kush, enduring starvation, freezing temperatures, and guerrilla resistance. Once in the Indian subcontinent, he allied with King Taxiles, Ambhai, of Taxila, who provided elephants and troops in support of Alexander's campaign. But the most formidable foe awaited farther east, King Porus, ruler of the Paurava kingdom. In May 326 BCE, on the banks of the Hydaspes River, modern-day Jhelum, Alexander faced one of the most challenging battles of his life. Porus, a towering warrior, led an army equipped with war elephants, something the Macedonian troops had never encountered in battle. To outmaneuver Porus, Alexander employed a brilliant ruse. He feigned a direct crossing while secretly leading a detachment of troops upstream during a night storm. At dawn, Alexander surprised Porus with a flank attack. The battle was brutal, many Macedonians and Indians alike perished, but Alexander's tactics and superior cavalry prevailed. Porus, despite his defeat, impressed Alexander deeply. When brought before the king, Alexander asked how he wished to be treated. Porus famously replied, "Like a king." Alexander not only spared him but appointed him as a satrap, greatly expanding his territory. This moment exemplified Alexander's paradoxical nature, capable of both ruthless conquest and generous statesmanship. Emboldened by victory, Alexander wished to push farther east, toward the Ganges River, where he had heard of vast kingdoms and powerful rulers. But his men had reached their limit. After nearly a decade of continuous campaigning, enduring deserts, mountains, and monsoons, his army mutinied at the Hyphasis River, modern Beas River. They refused to go any farther. Alexander was devastated. For days, he sulked in his tent, reportedly refusing food or company. But eventually, he relented. In a symbolic gesture, he erected altars to the gods and turned back, marking the easternmost point of his conquests. Though the march forward had ended, the journey home would prove just as perilous. Instead of retracing his northern route, Alexander chose a more ambitious, and disastrous, path back, a march through the Gadrosian Desert, modern Baluchistan. It was a fatal decision. The harsh terrain, combined with searing heat, lack of water, and supply failures, decimated his army. Thousands of soldiers, porters, and animals perished. Historians still debate his motives for this route. Some suggest he wanted to emulate the Persian king Cyrus, others believe it was a test of endurance or a punishment for his army's earlier mutiny. Regardless, the Gadrosian March became one of the greatest tragedies of Alexander's life. He emerged from the desert gaunt, exhausted, and changed. In 324 BCE, Alexander finally returned to Babylon, the city he had claimed after defeating Darius. Rather than resting, he launched into an ambitious set of reforms and plans. He envisioned a unified empire with shared governance between Macedonians and Persians. He arranged a mass wedding at Susa, where he and many of his generals married Persian noblewomen. Alexander took a second wife, Statira, daughter of Darius, while maintaining his marriage to Roxana. He also began integrating thousands of Persian soldiers into his army and implemented administrative reforms to stabilize the vast regions he had conquered. These changes, however, were met with resistance from many of his Macedonian officers, who felt increasingly alienated by his embrace of Persian customs and ideals. In an attempt to win back his troops' favor, Alexander discharged thousands of Macedonian veterans with honors and rewards. Yet, the strain was evident. Alexander was now a man ruling over a kingdom that was too large, too diverse, and too fragile for one person to control. One of the deepest emotional blows of Alexander's life came in 324 BCE, with the sudden death of Hephaestion, his closest friend, companion, and possibly lover. Hephaestion had fallen ill after a public feast and died days later in Ecbatana. Alexander was inconsolable. He ordered elaborate funeral rites, demanded heroic honors for Hephaestion, and plunged into a deep period of mourning. Some accounts say he refused food and tore his clothes. He executed the physician who had failed to save him and shaved his head in grief. The death of Hephaestion may have marked the beginning of the end. Alexander had always been intense and mercurial, but now he grew more erratic. He began speaking more openly of his divine nature and redoubled his plans for future conquests, including a campaign into Arabia. But fate would intervene. In June 323 BCE, at the age of 32, Alexander the Great died in Babylon. The exact cause remains unknown and hotly debated. Some theories suggest malaria, others typhoid fever, poisoning, autoimmune disease, or a fever brought on by exhaustion and wounds. Whatever the cause, his death came suddenly, after a brief illness that left him speechless and paralyzed. On his deathbed, when asked to whom he would leave his empire, Alexander is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." With no named heir, his son with Roxana was not yet born. His death set off a catastrophic power struggle. Alexander's body was reportedly placed in a gold sarcophagus and transported to Alexandria, though some sources suggest it was diverted to Memphis. Wherever his final resting place may be, it became a site of pilgrimage and mystery, eventually lost to history. With no clear successor, Alexander's empire fractured almost immediately. His generals, known as the Diadochi, waged bloody wars to claim pieces of the vast territory he had conquered. These men, once united under Alexander, now turned on each other in a desperate bid for supremacy. The empire was carved into multiple Hellenistic kingdoms. Ptolemy took Egypt and founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. Seleucus claimed Persia and Mesopotamia, forming the Seleucid Empire. Antigonus, Lysimachus, and Cassander battled over Asia Minor and Greece. The age of unified rule had ended. Yet, through this fragmentation, Hellenistic culture spread, blending Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian elements. Alexander's dream of a multicultural empire may not have survived politically, but culturally, it laid the groundwork for centuries of exchange and synthesis. Over the centuries, Alexander became more than a historical figure, he became a legend. Greek historians like Arrian, Plutarch, and Diodorus Siculus painted him as a heroic genius, while later Roman emperors, Islamic scholars, and even medieval Christian writers molded him into their own cultural ideals. He was called the Great, the son of Zeus, the conqueror of the world. In Persian literature, he became Iskandar the Two-Horned, a figure of awe and mystery. In the Alexander romance, his tale was embellished with dragons, sea voyages, and divine visions. But modern historians also consider the contradictions of his life. Alexander was a brilliant tactician, but he also razed cities and executed rivals. He spread culture, but imposed rule by force. He was a visionary, yet his empire disintegrated after his death. He inspired loyalty and rebellion, admiration and fear. Like all great men, he was complex, flawed, and human. Alexander's legacy is measured not just by the battles he won or the miles he marched, but by the world he reshaped. He broke the boundaries between East and West, between myth and reality. He created cities that endured for millennia. He changed the language of diplomacy, warfare, and culture. And he inspired generations, from Caesar to Napoleon, from poets to emperors. He was not merely the son of Philip or the student of Aristotle. He was a singular figure who, in just over a decade, changed the course of human history. His empire may have died with him, but the idea of Alexander lived on, and still lives. Alexander the Great's story is one of glory and grief, power and peril, ambition and mortality. Born in a small kingdom on the edge of Greece, he rose to become the master of the known world. He fused cultures, spread knowledge, and left behind an enduring vision of unity and greatness. His death marked the end of an age, but his legend has never faded. Whether seen as a hero or a tyrant, a god or a man, Alexander remains one of history's most compelling figures, a mirror through which we explore our own thirst for greatness and the cost it demands.